Before proceeding with this session, I'd like to mention that in the penultimate session for clergy only, we tried to contact all those who had registered. We sent an email that apparently didn't reach everybody. Apologies for that. Anyway, now I will ask Father Chrysanthos to moderate. Your Eminences, Your Graces, Reverend Fathers, we shall begin with our first speaker, Markus Zervos, who teaches at the State University of Detroit. He is a well-respected scientist on the matter of contagious diseases, and we will ask him to speak first and tell us a little bit about himself. You have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Your Eminence, Archbishop Nikitas, for allowing me to participate in this program. Father Stavros, of course, for organizing my talk. Your Graces, Your Eminences, and Reverend Fathers, thank you for your participation in this and allowing me to participate in this important program. My background is that I am an infectious disease doctor working in Detroit. I also work very closely with our government agencies, our health department in the response to various infections, including, of course, most recently to COVID. Detroit was hit very hard with COVID. We had many hospitalizations, many deaths, and we continue to see some infections, although the infections now are better. Our work with the health department has included working in various vulnerable populations, including nursing home residents where we have very high death rates, and homeless populations, and also work to improve testing and some of the control measures that were being done. I have worked globally in infectious disease efforts, and we have many initiatives throughout the world in the work that we're doing. But most importantly, I work as a physician and am a member of the Holy Cross Greek Orthodox Church that is nearby to Detroit. Of course, COVID has been terribly devastating, affecting now almost 120 million people around the world, with 2.6 million deaths worldwide. It has changed our lives in many ways, including the lockdowns that have happened, and of course the impact that it's had on us individually and also on our families. I was asked to talk about the future and the post-pandemic, and we are looking forward to the time where there will be a post-pandemic. Even though this was the worst pandemic, one of the worst pandemics that we've seen in the last 100 years, we are starting to see some evidence of hope. We're seeing less infections in many countries. Some countries are able to open up and reduce some of the restrictions and some of the lockdowns that have occurred. The vaccine that has become available has provided for us to be able to also look to the future with hope, that with the immunization, vaccination of the public, we anticipate seeing a continued decrease in the number of infections. In terms of what to say for the future, it's always difficult or impossible to predict the future, but we look to seeing a time where there will be more immunity in the population, either as a result of vaccine or natural immunity. Once we get to about 70 to 80% immunity, then the infections will decrease even more than where they are now. Some countries have done really well with this and have very few infections. Other countries like the United States have done terribly, and we have made improvements, but we had very difficult times, including up to now. It's likely that we are going to see continued infections, and people talk about the future as being going back to normal, but it'll be a new normal, and there'll continue to be some importance to being careful, especially if somebody is elderly, if they have underlying diseases, to continue to do the things that we know are effective, like hand washing and wearing masks and distancing from others, avoiding being in large groups, at least until the numbers of infections decline more than where they are now. With vaccination, it will be possible for people to get together in groups over time, but it's likely that we'll still see more cases and maybe even spikes or increases in cases. But now we have better treatments, better ways of prevention that will make things better for the future. We will have to deal with some long-term complications. For example, many people that have COVID have continued symptoms, and sometimes have symptoms for long periods of time. The symptoms can affect the heart, they can affect the lung, and they can cause persistent fatigue, headaches, muscle aches that sometimes can last months and even have lasted several months in some people. Of course, we have to deal with the psychological and spiritual aspects that others will talk about, and I won't mention. We also very importantly need to look at what is it that we've learned from this experience. We are going to continue to have pandemics. This is not considered to be, this is terrible pandemic. It's the worst pandemic we've had in the last 100 years in the world. But it's not the pandemic that is, that some experts say could even be worse than this, which likely would be something like a new strain of influenza perhaps, or some other infection that is even more deadly and that people don't have immunity for and that can spread quickly. So there will always be infections, there will always be new infections, there will always be pandemics that we will need to deal with. What we hope we learn in this from the future is people that are responsible for public health, that we learn how better to respond to infections, how better to deal with these infections earlier, how better to prevent infections, how better to work with our neighbors. It's not appropriate for us to isolate ourselves in one country, isolate itself from others. It doesn't take much for an infection or somebody with an infection to get on an airplane and then go to another country and then spread infection after that. We need to look at, or some other vector. We need to look at how we can build on improving the health of our neighbors. We also need to look in the future at how do we protect vulnerable population. What happened in Detroit was that the most vulnerable were the ones that got initially infected and then spread. People living in nursing homes, people that were homeless, people that that were poor and didn't have good contact to healthcare, were the ones that were affected the most severely with the initial infections, at least that we were seeing in many cities, large cities in the United States. I hope that we can also learn from this how better to evaluate and treat infections. This I've been an infectious disease doctor for 35 years, and I have never seen anything like this where there was so much politicization of science. So if we were speaking for the United States, if we were for Trump, then we thought hydroxychloroquine, for example, was a good treatment. If you were against Trump, you thought it was going to kill anybody that you gave it to. It is, and that's terrible. It's not the way that, and that's actually still being done right now, and not just the United States, but other countries. Or many other countries, the science has become very politicized, and that is not helpful in deciding on the right things to do. So we have learned a lot about how better to prevent and treat infections. Hopefully, we'll learn better how to build on the public health parts of what we're doing. We'll learn better on how to treat, also how to treat the long-term complications. We need to learn better how to address some of the misinformation and some of the hesitancy that people have. There's a lot of misinformation about treatments for COVID. There's a lot of misinformation about the vaccines in particular. There are a lot of concerns about the vaccine and vaccines that are serious, legitimate concerns that we need to address, and our spiritual fathers are also addressing with things like what were the cell lines that were used to produce some of the vaccines have become a question for at least for some of our archbishops in the Catholic Church in the United States and perhaps elsewhere. Again, I want to thank everybody for your time. I believe that we do have hope for the future, that we will be moving to better times despite all the hardship that everybody has suffered, especially those people that have lost family members or that have had to work in hospitals, that have been affected very severely over this period of time. Thank you again for your attention, and I'll be glad to answer questions when the time is for that.
Σας ευχαριστούμε πολύ. Έχουμε 12 λεπτά για ερωτήσεις.
Many thanks. We have 12 minutes for questions, and I beg of you, keep them short and don't expound on viewpoints. Just keep them questions. Thank you.
Έχουμε μία ερώτηση. Πατέρα Χρήστο.
Με ακούτε?
Βεβαίως σας ακούμε.
Ωραία.
Father Christos, can you hear me? Yes, of course.
Thank you very much. I will just ask, why do we have this politicization you mentioned?
That's a very important question, and it's also a very difficult question to answer. And I think some of that is varies by country, and it raises the point that there's a lot of within medicine. There are a lot of contextual issues that we always have to deal with, and each country is a little bit different in the contextual issues, and we have to tailor the medicine that we do and the treatments that we do to the context of the country that we're working in. What happened in the United States is we just had a very unpopular president among half of our population, and that resulted in all of these issues, which were not only unfortunate, but they involved very smart people that became involved in it. And people are against vaccine when Trump was in office, and then now that he's not in office, they're for vaccine. So it's not good to politicize the medicine and science.
Thank you, Mr. Zervos.
Η κυρία Κέρι Πάπας θέλει να κάνει μια ερώτηση.
Mrs. Kerry Papas.
Mark, given your work in the global community, what do you think the larger global medical community can learn about cooperating as a result of this pandemic?
Thank you. That's a very that's a very important question. We have to look at our neighbors to build the strength of our neighbors. It is what happened with, and there are many examples of this. What happened with Ebola, for example. If we didn't deal with Ebola in Africa, it could have spread to other countries and been a lot more serious than what it was. For COVID, it originated in China, and if we had better relationship with China, China was more transparent, then we would be able to have recognized the epidemic earlier and been able to deal with it at an earlier time. So the importance of working with neighbors is so that infections can be addressed early, and then they can be controlled from there.
Can I ask a question? You said that the epidemics will continue. Does that also mean that we will have to restrict ourselves in church attendance and so on, that has put a strain on people?
No, thank you, Father. That's a very important question. So what is anticipated to happen is either through the vaccine or natural immunity, we will have, or natural infection, will have immunity in the population. And once we get to about, scientists argue about this, but once we get to about 70%, 80% of the population having antibody, then things will go pretty much to normal. Before that, there are opportunities for things to open up. So, for example, once the infection rates decrease from where they've been in the past, then things like schools can begin to open cautiously, churches can open safely. And then as the number of infections go down further, then things will go back to more normal. There's some countries like New Zealand, for example, they were very careful with their control measures, and they've gone completely to normal. So there's no masks, no nothing. It's just 100% to normal. Other countries like the United States have done terribly. So it's been a slower, there's been a slower return to normal. I think we will get to a time, and we're thinking maybe even by the summer, that by vaccine and natural infection, that we'll get to a point that will be closer to normal, and the schools, churches can open. I know that Greece has suffered many lockdowns, and hopefully with the decrease of infections over time in Greece over the next few months, that the things like the schools and the churches will also be able to open. There might still be some restrictions. When we're opening schools, for example, there's some still restrictions on number of people that can be in a room, and making sure that there's ventilation so that the windows are open, if there's good ventilation, that people wash hands. So even now, when there's still some infections, the lockdowns can stop. And as we see a further decrease in infection, then things will go back to normal. There may still be a time where it becomes more like flu, where the people that are the most vulnerable have to take the most precautions. So the elderly, the people with chronic disease will need to be the most careful.
Father Gianpaolo, I think you have a question. Or proceed. Okay.
Εάν δεν έχουμε
yes,
κάποια...
Now I see it, yes.
Okay.
There has been, as you said, good journalism and bad journalism, good information and bad information. I wonder whether the bad journalism in the future will try to acquire more audience, to spread unjustified panic among the audience. And I refer to maybe the hypothesis that next year, for the normal pandemic of the common flu, we will start again to count the deaths in that case, what we have never have been doing in the past.
Yes. No, that's an important point. We have to be careful when there's, I think when there is misinformation, that it is challenged, and that people speak out, the people that are honest and that are believed and that are the people that are, you know, knowledgeable, that they do speak out against misinformation. And I think it's also important, and that people are held accountable if they're spreading things that are false. I think it's also important that it's not just one person that's, you know, speaking for everybody. It is, I think it's important to have a consensus. So to not just say one person is going to say, you know, how things are going to be in science. The way the scientific process, public health process works is that you have a combination of people that get together, different backgrounds, talk about what is appropriate and how to interpret the data, and then go forward from that. It's not one person or another is important, but misinformation definitely needs to be dealt with. I have never seen, besides the politicization, I've never seen more misinformation in my whole life, academic, you know, medical life, than what's happened with COVID. The treatments, the testing, the effects of the virus, and now it's with the vaccines. There's a lot of misinformation about the vaccines, and there's things that are true about the vaccine that lead people not to want to take it that still need to be answered, because people have questions. They have, you know, legitimate questions, and it needs to be answered in a factual way.
Πατέρα Ζήση, νομίζω ότι είχατε ζητήσει το λόγο. Αν δεν θέλετε, μπορούμε να προχωρήσουμε στον κύριο Παπαγιάννη.
I think you have asked for the floor. Otherwise, Mr. Papagiannis. Thank you again for your talk. In the same wavelength, let me ask something else. For example, before the pandemic, if I had a cold, I would go visit my grandmother. I wouldn't think that I could spread influenza to my grandmother and make her die. Do you think that this type of habits will change after the pandemic? This means that are we going to be more aware as regards health issues?
Yes, thank you for that question. I think people are more aware. There's more hand washing, people wearing masks, distancing. If they're sick, you know, they don't come to work as much. I mean, there was a time even in the hospitals that people will come to work sick. And now they don't do that. They don't come to work if they're sick. So, interestingly, besides COVID, we saw no influenza in the United States this year, and part of that was because of the precautions that people were taking. They were wearing masks, washing hands, you know, distancing from others, all of that. So, you know, hopefully that will continue, because those measures are important, not just for COVID, but for influenza and for many other infections. Of course, I mean, there's others that know more about human behavior than me, but as somebody who's been a physician for 35 years, I know that that's always a struggle with the human behavior and getting people to do things. But I know the Reverend Fathers know, they understand. That's well known to I think everybody here, of course.
Τελευταία ερώτηση
A
από...
final question from Mr. Papagiannis before giving the floor to our next speaker. Could you please identify yourself?
Thank you. I am a pulmonologist in Thessaloniki, Greece. Thank you, Dr. Zervos. I have been wondering all this time that because apart from the politicization, there has also been, in quotation marks, spiritualization of the disease in a negative sense, in that a lot of reaction to vaccination and a lot of reaction to a lot of denial to the existence of the disease itself has come from actually religious people, from priests and from abbots, etc., etc. And I wonder whether there had to be a sort of better understanding and a better correspondence and communication between scientific circles, medical circles, and spiritual circles at the highest possible level in order to have a consensus on how to actually inform people and how to attract people to a correct way of managing the pandemic. Thank you.
No, thank you for that comment. That and question. That's a very important point, because I think when we look at science, then we need to have not just one person speaking, but a consensus from people from different backgrounds and different groups, but it's the same thing, even more generally, is that we should have interdisciplinary or groups of people with different backgrounds of the clergy, the medical community, others. So like this meeting that is happening now, to be able to discuss what the issues are, develop a consensus, and then have it, believed by the broader community after that. So getting people together, I think, to discuss the issues and what is the science behind these issues is very very important to do. Thank you for that comment.
Thank you.
Σας ευχαριστούμε πολύ. Θα προχωρήσουμε
Thank you very much. We continue with the next speaker, Constantine Zorbas, who has studied political science, social science, and theology in Strasbourg, the Sorbonne, and elsewhere, and has made a contribution through the Council of European Churches. He has been the director of the Orthodox Academy in Crete since 2015. You have the floor, sir. Thank you very much. Your Eminences, Reverend Fathers, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, let me thank Father Stavros for the opportunity to look at the issues given to everyone. In March 2020, when he invited me to participate in this consultation, he said, do pencil it in your diary. The coronavirus is bound to be with us still then. And we have heard it said that it is unrealistic to expect humanity to be relieved of the pandemic. But if we play our cards well, we can ensure that these people will be properly hospitalized and that will be at their side to assist them by standing by them. I think this is what the network is doing through this consultation and at large. I will pose three questions and seek to respond to them. First, how have we dealt and coped with the pandemic? In a book to be published next week by Nikitas editions, entitled Social Crisis and Pandemic, we have several references to our discussion. This is not the first pandemic by any stretch of the imagination. People have been face to face with contagion in the past in the form of epidemics or pandemics, but they left their stamp on human society. Lambros Kamberidis gives an account, starting with the plague reported by Thucydides up to Papadiamandis, our short story writer, and Albert Camus, La Peste. So we get an idea of how things stand, in the midst of which we try to put our life in a proper perspective and seek to account for ourselves in a suitable manner. We heard say that there's been new fears and new concerns arising because of the pandemic, but those are to be debited to false news and to a mishandling of this newsworthy item. Day by day, the epidemic of fear became coterminous with the epidemic of false news, causing much anxiety and much controversy. And that bespeaks not just the pandemic crisis, but something wider, what globalization means, what raising obstacle in between nations bodes. One thing is clear, though, it is high time to gainsay our past habits and to develop a new narrative. With the pandemic, we find society range before more significant issues. And the bioethics aspect, for instance, has been much debated in the European Council of Churches, and the prayer for contagion for infectious disease of the Ecumenical Patriarchate gave us much strength. What have we to suggest vis-a-vis the pandemic? People have changed. Mrs. Zervos said so. Over 2.6 million people have died. There will be more, no doubt. And the question of the vulnerability of human nature is matched by the inability of social structures to cope properly with the peril at hand. Even now, where we do have vaccines, there are still multi-dependent or mutually dependent social problems. And it is clear that those that pay the price of the pandemic shall be the poor nations, the indigent. Our societies have been dealing with imponderables time and time again, and the question is how to distinguish what needs to be done. With the pandemic, we saw that it could not be contained, and therefore it would lead to existential insecurity, not because of the risks inherent in the pandemic, but also of the sequelae, economic or other. The one thing we need to keep in mind is that we don't yet have a way of fathoming where we are at. Even social scientists need to keep away from pontificating and making forecasts. To echo Habermas, it's never been the case that we've had so much knowledge about our ignorance. And the American psychotherapist Irvin Yalom leads to 4 major existential anxieties: of certitude of death, loneliness, the inability to decree how we shall live, and the ignorance of what the future bodes for us. One thing is for certain, that what the sociologists call acceleration exacerbates a problem. We try to do ever more, forever more. There is acceleration of the spread of ideas through revolutions, ideas that we can hardly comprehend or assimilate. A series of revolutions, digital revolution, the fourth industrial revolution. Could you please ask the gentleman to speak more slowly from a text that he did not see fit to share with us? Can you please stop him and ask him to speak more slowly? It's impossible to follow this rate for a text that we have not been given to look at and prepare. It will not be possible to continue with the gentleman. Can you please stop him and ask him to deliver the speech more slowly? If it's not possible, then I'm afraid that we will have to stop for a while.
Πώς μπορούν όλες αυτές οι δυνάμεις, οι οποίες είναι χρήσιμες για τη συνοχή του κόσμου, να ξαναβρούν τη συνοχή τους και να υπάρξει ένα μέλλον. Φοβάμαι ότι δεν μπορούμε να το κάνουμε αυτό, διότι δεν ξέρουμε τι σημαίνει η αποξένωση του ανθρώπου. Ή με άλλα λόγια, απορρίφθηκε αυτή η ιδέα εδώ και πάρα πολλά χρόνια, μέχρι και που έχει ξεχαστεί, για να μπορέσουμε να προσδιορίσουμε πώς θα είναι ο μη αποξενωμένος τρόπος ζωής. Όλη αυτή η προβληματική οδηγεί σήμερα τις κοινωνίες σε μια νέα αντίληψη περί της επιβράδυνσης των πραγμάτων. Η μεν Εκκλησία αντιλαμβάνεται...
Things need to slow down. The Church deems that to be a return to the past, a certain degree of mutability. The economy wants to redeploy jobs, money, and so on. We need to look towards developing a new kind of relationship amongst humans beyond alienation. The pandemic can bring change everywhere. The crisis is not only a health crisis or economic in nature. It's a crisis that requires of us to rethink our developmental model because it's anthropological in nature. We are trying to reacquaint ourselves with ourselves. We try to fathom what our neighbors are like and how they have changed. And there's another term that is introduced that breaks down our relationship with our brothers. It is dependency. And while in a situation of dependency, we seek to draw distance between ourselves and others, but at the same time, we know that unless there is some sort of rapprochement, we won't be able to make do. And what will post-pandemic society be like? What will the consequences or challenges be like? Personally, I think that we are dealing with a profound problem indeed, unless we take into consideration the various crises that we are going through in tandem. The fourth industrial revolution, the refugee and migrant question, climate change, a huge topic, the pandemics on the rise that are sure to come, what have you. So I cannot explain what the world will look like in the future, how it will shape our lives. We can't take anything for granted. We can't think of anything as gained and ours. Everything is in stasis. Is there a vision wherein the church can lead us? We heard the politicians say the following: we are preparing transition to a post-COVID era, a new era for modern democratic society, where we need a new agreement for reform and progress by the citizens, for the citizens, end of quotation. If the church is looking to a specific dimension, what is it preparing for? Beyond the last things, of course. And can human societies belonging to civil society pull in and help one another? At the Great and Holy Synod held here in Crete in 2016, the Orthodox Church acknowledged the need to promote dialogue and cooperation, especially with those who open up the path to justice and mutual cooperation and mutual love, so that everybody be part of the single human family. Dialogue with civil society is needful to develop mutual confidence, trust, and collaboration for this interdisciplinarity, departmental approach. We have seen the offshoots of efforts to achieve such collaboration, and we need to delve deeper in them to know what we have to do henceforth. In closing, we need to prepare a path forward for the church. Normality can serve as a hope, but it can also serve as a threat for the exacerbation of inequality. And the church, vis-à-vis these difficult issues, the impact of which is imponderable, will have to progress in a very circumspect manner. It is ever more acceptable that for a post-pandemic era, we will manage the great restart. It's a view that arises from the Davos declarations. As in 1971, we saw the discourse look at the fourth industrial revolution. Last year, in 2020, the discussion, the debate was about the great restart of economies, politics, and societies. True, this is the right time for a re-evaluation of the pre-pandemic system and for looking at how to defend global values. There's been important steps towards removing poverty, child mortality, improving life expectancy, improving literacy, and a host of other things. Ought we not to engage in a more concerted effort post-pandemic, lest we are left with a legacy of death, so that we can progress to the final things, the four final things. Thank you very much, Mr. Zorbas. There's only 10 minutes or so left for questions. Father Salmas, and then Mr. Kosmidis.
Thank you, Mr. Zorbas. My question deals with the Black Death that struck Europe in the 14th century, I think about 1350. The church struggled to cope with the plague's damaging consequences, and its reputation suffered as a result. During this pandemic, many have been discouraged with the church. How can we gain people's trust back?
Θα μιλήσει και ο Νίκος και μετά να απαντήσω.
Απαντήστε.
You can respond now if you like. I believe that what has lost people's confidence is our comportment. And to regain confidence, we need to look at certain things vis-a-vis the present. The Orthodox Church always stresses the present, the now, the nunc. And especially in the pre-Lenten period, this is very topical. We hear priests and the hierarchy say their things, but not lending an ear to the physicians, as if they were sworn enemies against the sacrament of Holy Communion. Nothing being discussed about the possibility of transmitting the virus, by the way. Well, confidence links to simple things. There are words that bear ecclesiastical meaning. I think that His All Holiness put things right when he said that it's not Christ who is at risk, it's the Christians. It's not faith that is at risk, it's the faithful. If we fail to understand that, if we fail to make the most of the Gospels and of the patristic literature, I very much fear we are not going to progress as we would like. Mr. Kosmidis, and then His Eminence of Zimbabwe. Good greetings to Father Chrysanthos and to Theokostas. After major pandemics, people seem to turn to a certain libertinage. People lose their heads and they go crazy. So is the aftermath of the crisis or the pandemic going to lead to this free-for-all? Is the church doing what it needs to prepare us for this situation, given how badly hit it seems to be already. Well, listen, what we have experienced directly after the first part of the pandemic, it became evident that there is a huge shortfall of catechism for the faithful and for those that are not to be numbered among the faithful. Catechism was in the hands of the government, and that meant that we failed to take action, and we've seen many parishes that need to do a lot of important things, as we've seen also during the session. If we don't begin with catechism, I fear we will not have the results we are looking for. And what about the subject of religion as something taught at school? It doesn't seem to realize that there are those faithful who are not part of the church, and there are those who believe who do not wish to belong. I'm sorry, says the speaker, and corrects himself, and those who don't believe but want to be seen to belong. Well, what to do then? To try to get an improvement, we need to have strong outreaching parishes that show respect for science, doesn't ask God to perform miracles, and we need to reconcile what's outside the church and inside the church if we hope to be blessed with any benefit in a post-pandemic era. That's my feeling. That's how we should begin when this situation is at an end. And I refer to Mr. Christakis too, and I believe that things are going to be ever more difficult because of those crises unfolding in tandem, and therefore we can anticipate difficulties. Thank you very much. The last question goes to His Eminence of Zimbabwe, Seraphim. And Your Eminence of Arta will get back to you. You have the floor. Thank you very much. Blessings. I pray for blessings from you, distinguished speakers. The World Council of Churches asked me to share with you a text for a prayer for all the faithful, and I found a special prayer in the healthcare network website, and that's the one I'm going to share with them. Now, my brother, friend, Constantine, referred to the synod in Crete, and that was perhaps the most significant action of the Orthodox Church in the previous millennium. And we should conceive of Crete as an inception, a beginning, a start. And my brother of Thyateira in Great Britain was there, will remember all that. And I'm driven thereby to propose that there be an initiative for an inter-Orthodox continuation of these affairs. As I read the Acts chapter 4, it is said that all the members were united as one. Well, if all Orthodoxes are looking for the Ecumenical Patriarchate to take the lead, then we could hope for great things. His Eminence of Rhodes, um, apologies, Your Eminence, but we need to cut this down because we are lacking for time. Yes, I was saying that World Orthodoxy should seek to see how to unite us in the face of the pandemic. Yes, let those texts reach us in our parishes, and let us read one of the most important texts in the Theologian on fasting, and then we can approach the discernment with which the Ecumenical Patriarchate is dealing with these things. I am fervently of the opinion that right now we are responding to the major question about whether there is community teaching on the Orthodox Church. There's this beautiful piece of text expounded by acknowledged experts, theologians, and the matter is not a moral teaching, it's a social teaching that we can develop in the inter-Orthodox milieu. So as to move forward. Thank you very much, Mr. Zorbas. Now we go to the next speaker, Mr. Kyriakos Vlassopoulos, who has studied theology and has studied bioethics and the history of medicine. He has served in education, secondary level education. You have the floor.
Σας ευχαριστώ όλους. Είναι τιμή
Thank
και
you
χαρά.
very much. I would like to thank you one and all. This invitation has been an honor and pleasure. I would like to thank the network and especially Father Stavros Kofinas. When I realized that this was the last session of the consultation, memories came up to my mind from our farewell words at Rhodes. And I remember during the last day, after the enjoyment of the sessions and hospitality, we were leaving full and rich. I just hope and pray that we will meet again live at Rhodes. So before starting, I would like to say that while I was preparing my speech, I couldn't think that I was supposed to talk at the most dark hour for our country as regards the public health crisis and as regards violence and aggression among us. This is only human. At this point in time, instead of having, as the previous speakers said, instead of having reconciliation and solidarity, we see destruction of bonds and aggression. This is an issue which is pivotal for a therapist, and maybe we could come back to it later in our discussion. It is difficult to foresee anything, and especially the future. The corona pandemic was the first time after the Second World War when people in the West had to face the specter of massive deaths. After the pandemic, as after an ailment or after a trauma. A pandemic means that everybody gets sick somehow and nobody remains untouched. The whole planet became sick, our world village. A year later, we are still trying to recover, to realign ourselves, to go on, to learn. Wounds become painful when getting cold, and all previous traumas in our history are opened up again. It needs processing ex post. The disease, does it teach or is it beneficial? Asthenia in Greek means losing power, losing strength, losing control, and entering lack of certainty, lack of normality. I come across the greatest fear, the fear of dying, and I realize that I'm not omnipotent. I have shortcomings and deficits. It's only in sickness and grief that we come that close to full awareness of our human nature. In the Vesper of Antipascha, we hear the simplest and to the point definition of human nature. Man is the great wound. Not that man has a wound, a trauma, but man is an ontological wound. Breaking normality like a fracture, inability to work, financial difficulties, confinement and isolation, family conflicts, abuse and violence, constraints and restriction of individual freedoms for the benefit of safety, digital communication and virtual life, great mental burden. How can the suffering body of all of us recover? How can the social body recover? Forced immobility because of an unexpected disease could be an opportunity of fruitful quietness, self-examination, reflection, replanning, and maybe decision-making. How would we like to live afterwards when we stand on our feet again? Was everything fine in our previous normality? Maybe there was something in this way that is responsible for our sickness. If we change nothing, could it be that we will become sick again? Maybe we have to be prepared for the next pandemic, which will definitely come. Should we accept that life includes pandemics? And they were there in the past too. The old mother of an anisant keeps asking, could it be the result of our sins? And she adds, of climate change, of mass movement in our culture, of mass agriculture, of greediness that lets people unsatisfied and miserable. Does the crisis make us more insane or wiser? Both. In Japan, they appointed a minister for loneliness to deal with the suicide rate, which was increased because of COVID-19. Some people regress, some others become more lucid. Research now shows that the mental health of children, adults, families has been compromised. Increased anxiety, depression, sleep disorders, insomnia, fear, obsessive practices, psychosomatic symptoms. Those that were already vulnerable became worse. Those that got COVID and had to be hospitalized, especially in ICUs, have no access to their beloved ones. They are surrounded by people wearing uniforms like extraterrestrial beings. They are isolated, which only causes post-traumatic shock, aptopenia, that is the lack of physical touch, fear that they might spread the virus, overexposure to information that makes it difficult to tell real news from fake news, the sense of time that changes and becomes lost because of confinement create a situation of helplessness and even despair. The dreams of the analysants are very interesting in this period. Frequently, of course, in a symbolic and allegoric way, we see many of the conditions that are reported in research. Dreams describing scenes of ending and chaos, being isolated in the desert, helplessness, destruction, persecution by violent policemen, military in a dystopic city without roads or limits, or bodies without hands that are trying to embrace. In the psychotherapy groups, sometimes we see fragments of the dream of one member to be complemented by elements of dreams by other members, as if the whole team wants to unite, to be together against risk, fear, and threat. And at the same time, there are dreams that are destroyed by violent nightmares that attack whatever unites us and keeps us peaceful. Could it be that there is something in the dream, something real, discord, aggression, aggressiveness, suspicion, violence against the other, the different, the oblique, the fanatic who, in his paranoia, denies everything, and this is only a risk to the safety and the health of the others. How can we treat this rift, this division, this split? How can one find consolation for the detachment of digital life, the dematerialization of physical presence, the prevailing feeling of vision and image that distances us from our real selves with their needs and care of these needs? In the social media, especially now, there is more intense situation. The emotional temperature is high and there is anxiety, attacks. Maybe this is necessary for me to exist in the digital world, which is going to be there after the pandemic. Working and studying from a distance are there to stay. But how can one feel as a member of a team if the team never actually meets? Let's think what this could mean for the community, the family, the psyche of each of us. All these unmourned, unaccompanied, lonely deaths, untouched in covered coffins, unconsoled relatives, without caressing and embracing, with deficient honors and rituals. How can we assimilate this pain and the agony and the anxiety for the unknown long-term complications for those that recovered, but not fully? In this pandemic of fear, we have the material in our psychotherapy which indicates the fear of God abandoning man, the silence of God, the absence of God, the sadistic indifference of God. Many feel that everything is in demise, history has no meaning, all human beings become separated from others and enter a narcissistic individual fate which hands over a worse world to the next generation. Each cultivates an individual utopia, a chimera that has to do with success, richness, prestige. Most are afraid that they are destined to run aground. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child, a long way from home. This is what one of the members of the group said and added, what can we do with all these? Undoubtedly, therapists, pastors, doctors raise the same question. For all of us, it was, and it still is, a huge trial to deal with unprecedented conditions. Overnight, we had to learn how to work with our analyzants without close contact, but through the monitor. This type of communication gives us the possibility to see and hear the patient, but not to feel him the way we could feel him if he was by us in our office. We had to change the way we talk, we had to change our techniques to give more direct guidelines, become less analytical. We had to adjust fast and effectively in an urgent situation. The world and our lives were never safe and foreseeable. However, they were never that fluid as regards labor relations, the economy, or even the weather. We cannot tell the seasons now. We have to assimilate, to process, to give meaning to the pain and this gap. It is a dire need to keep relations and words alive. These were always the ways to survive. We have to mentally think what is happening before acting brutally, and we have to understand each other to find consensus with the others that are different from us. Maybe we could thus have some sympathy for the others that suffer like us. They're alien, but they are ours because we have a common faith and a common threat. We will say that we went through our own war, occupation, or destruction. But we have to take care, we have to avoid psychiatrization of grief and of advice and guidelines of mental instructions. We have to remember that there is no general advice. Each of us is unique. Some say that we have to erase the years 2020 and 2021 from our lives and go on. In this way, however, we succumb to the tyranny of forced happiness, of an inhumane life without cracks, gaps, lacunae, or grief. It is the pathology of normality which is averse to the hard side of life, and at the same time, it fertilizes it. It is like forgetting those who died or fall sick in our grief-denying era, and the weak border between the mentally vulnerable and the mentally healthy, or maybe even the mentally and spiritually useful benefit of dispelling the myth of the omnipotent and invulnerable man cultivated in our culture. Especially the church, when operating as a church, as a congregation, as an assembly, it has always had ways to work in this direction. Networks of bonds and links, support groups for those that suffer trauma, doctors, pastors, grieving, elderly, educators, split parishes, abused couples, mainly sources of meaning and solidarity, a sense of containment to all suffering. This wealth of ethos, liturgical tradition, practices, and human quality can be fully utilized together with probable changes that are underway and we still do not know them. Maybe these images recall of something, of somebody who, though injured himself, takes it upon him to hold all ailing and sick as a doctor and therapist. Thank you.
Ευχαριστούμε πολύ.
Thank you very much indeed.
Έχουμε κάποιες ερωτήσεις.
I think we have a couple of questions.
Εάν δεν έχουμε, νομίζω μπορούμε να περάσουμε
If
στον
this
επόμενο.
is not the case, maybe we could proceed to our next speaker.
Ωραία. Επόμενος ομιλητής μας για απόψε είναι ο Σεβασμιότατος
Our
Αρχιεπίσκοπος.
next speaker is His Eminence, Archbishop Nikitas of Thyateira in Great Britain, born in Philadelphia, US, with studies in the US and Europe. He has been Protosyngelos in Chicago, then Metropolitan of Hong Kong, and was elected to the throne of Great Britain and Thyateira in 2019. You have the floor, sir. Good afternoon. I was born in Florida. Just a slight correction.
I've been asked to speak in English this evening, and I will speak on more practical aspects, both what were the critical issues and challenges, and also what we may have learned from the pandemic. First, to offer my gratitude to Father Stavros Kofinas, not only for the invitation, but for his very hard work and everything that he does along with those who work with him, in the name of a suffering world and society, but also the joy that the Ecumenical Patriarch and our Patriarchate has embraced this ministry and offers it to so many people. Your Eminences, your Graces, Reverend Fathers, Doctors, Presbyteres, sisters and brothers, I serve in a land which is not Orthodox, and Orthodoxy is the minority within the minority. Many of you live and serve in a land where Orthodoxy is the majority, and you see and experience life in a different way than we do. We have different problems, different challenges, different situations. But the world in its totality experienced and is continuing to experience the problems of the pandemic. A recent survey conducted by the Anglican Church, or the Anglican Communion, the Episcopal Church, however you might know them, told us that 20% of their faithful will never return to church services. 20%. If that's going to happen to and for the Anglicans, what does that mean for us? Because we will suffer many of the same situations, whether we like it or not. Let me look first at some of the challenges so that we can end up on a positive note as I speak. Unfortunately, during these days, as you know, we've had the rise of fundamentalism and the very question, who is the real Orthodox? Is the real Orthodox defined by the person who does not take the vaccination? And by the way, I was vaccinated this afternoon. Or is the real Orthodox the person who doesn't wear the mask? Or is the real person the one who comes to communion first in line for others to see? And is the real Orthodox the person who espouses conspiracy theories? As one distant relative told my brother, that there is manipulation through the vaccine to control our minds so that we become robots. And unfortunately, we have many clergy who are embracing all sorts of theories and sharing them with the people. Of course, they also include those discussion groups about the chip and from where the vaccine comes and whatever. But we also have other challenges which have come. Do not I have the right to decide what's good for the church? I as an individual. A new mindset has come in with Orthodoxy, as if we are a democracy and we all vote on everything, how to do things and how to proceed. We have liturgical issues and challenges to face. For example, do we use one spoon, one lavida, or many? And for those who have chosen to use many lavidas or spoons, will your community return to the use of one spoon? Is this a challenge of faith? And as the Ukrainian Catholic bishop told me, for his communities, they use wooden spoons so they can burn them afterward. And he actually asked me if I was interested. So it tells us that the challenges we're facing exist elsewhere. But we have seen that not only in the case of communion, but other liturgical practices, the clergy have taken personal initiatives, as if I, as an individual, have the right to decide and to develop my own system and patterns of liturgical practices. We also saw that the church has entered a new dimension in time, in the digital age, where churches or church services became available online. So people began to believe that they could participate in the life of the church through a television screen or something else. So the family would sit at home and have breakfast, and the liturgy would go on. It would be something different, a virtual experience, which is unusual for the church. Perhaps the most challenging and difficult thing is that our clergy were ill-equipped to answer many questions, many of the problems and the challenges. But God, in his grace and his mercy, does not leave us in the negative, but also directs us and gears us to what is right and positive. And what did we learn? We learned how to develop new ministries in the church. While we may have that challenge of watching television services on the screen, the liturgical services, we were also able to develop other ministries through Zoom, through other means of communication through the internet. And those were Bible studies, religious education. We have those in England, for example, Bible study in Greek, Bible study in English, Orthodoxy 101, and even Sunday school. So it allowed the church to show that it could use technology and so many other things to minister to her people. We also were able to develop aspects of philanthropy, food banks, to meet the needs of the hungry and those suffering. We heard the gospel passage this last Sunday. When I was hungry, did you feed me? When I was alone, did you come to me? And we were able to develop systems where the clergy and the faithful reach out to those who were isolated and alone. The church became the caretaker. And believe it or not, those who showed the most interest in these programs were the young people, those under 30. They responded and they contributed and they acted, and they wanted to share this message with other people. But we also learned something else which is critical, that the church is not an isolated institution. It must work with those in the medical profession, those who are psychologists, the therapists, those who can assist people in overcoming isolation, depression, children who do not know how to have relationships with other children, who have not gone to school in a year, who remain alone. And also that the clergy themselves were in need of support. The clergy themselves may have had to speak to a psychiatrist, a psychologist, a therapist, because the clergy who went through Holy Week and Pascha in empty churches became depressed, felt isolated, felt their pain. And within the archdiocese, we made therapists available to our clergy. And some of the clergy did respond. We allowed them to seek professional help for perhaps things that we couldn't answer for them, how to deal with pain, how to deal with frustration. And that is one of the things that this very institution, this offering of the Patriarchate through the work of Father Stavros and so many other people, speak out to those in need, and they try to equip our clergy and the people to address the problems of a suffering society. And how do we express the care and the concern? First, by learning the proper language. Some of our clergy don't have the tools and the skills, and I don't mean either Greek, English, Romanian, whatever, the language to speak to people, the gentleness, the touch. We can't come into contact with people. Some hospitals we couldn't even enter. I had gone with Father Evgenios to the hospital to visit someone, and we were stopped and not allowed to go in. And I'm sure I'm not the only person who experienced that. But this pandemic gave us the ability to become co-workers, to become co-workers in a family, for our clergy to overcome their own differences and their problems, to see that there were much greater needs in the world and society. It taught us that we need to build resources. Some of you know that I'm involved in the issues of human trafficking and modern slavery. We're in the process of gathering material for publication to teach our clergy, our Sunday school teachers, and other educators about human trafficking, because it's not about the other. It's about our own community, about our problems, our families who are suffering. In the same way, the pandemic isn't about the other. It's about us. It's about our clergy who have suffered and some have died. It's about the families who feel isolated. It's the families who couldn't say goodbye to their loved ones and have pain. And we can give them comfort, first in the name of Jesus Christ and in the name of the church. What do we do for those people? We have to become the caretakers, the church, the mother that gave birth to these people through baptism. The church, which is the institution of love, must give it. And through working with professionals, whether it be doctors or academics or therapists, we can gain the tools and meet the needs of our people. This discussion this evening, these presentations need to be shared, because tonight there are, I don't know exactly, right now I think about 128 people, at least in the group. I don't know how many are watching or following, but what we're talking about isn't only about us, it's about the world. It's about a world in crisis, and we have to give the answers. Thank you very much. I'll stop there. You know, bishops can, δεν ξέρουμε και την τελεία που να σταματήσουμε. Αλλά σταματήσω και να δοθεί ευκαιρία αν υπάρχουν ερωτήσεις. Ευχαριστώ και πάλι πρώτα τον Οικουμενικό Πατριάρχη.
Bishops sometimes know not when to put a full stop. But apropos of my coming to a close, I'd like to thank you for listening, to His All Holiness for creating the wherewithal for this get-together, and to the people who worked to get it going and rolling. Thank you very much. Now it's time for questions to His Eminence. Father Peter.
Thank you, Your Eminence. We've noticed here in the metropolis of San Francisco, especially the parish that you know very well, that our Bible studies and our studies in the faith classes have reached beyond the parish and even beyond the Orthodox world to outsiders, people outside of Orthodoxy that have an interest, that are looking for some place to go and to study, so that people, it's almost like an evangelistic ministry that has developed with so many others outside of Orthodoxy coming to these classes. Have you noticed the same thing in England, in your archdiocese?
Yes, I have. In the Bible studies that we conduct, the major one is by Father Nifon, which is in English. And we get people even from Malta, Spain, Greece, the United States, even the San Francisco Bay Area. Father Christodoulos conducts a meleti in Greek. And then we have a course called Orthodoxy 101. And we have about 200 people attending that. And of course, the Sunday schools. We are able to provide perhaps some things that other communities don't. And we're building something different here, and that is, of course, the relationship and the bridges with other Orthodox clergy, hierarchs, and communities. I spoke with Metropolitan Silouan of the Antiochian Archdiocese here, and we're going to begin our own programs together for Orthodox unity and solidarity in the name of Jesus Christ. Thank you, Father Peter, and my love to your community.
And our love for you and your family and your communities there.
Μπορούμε να ανοίξουμε τη συζήτηση, δεν είναι μόνο
We can open up the discussion. It doesn't need to be questions only to His Eminence, Mr. Papagiannis.
Ευχαριστούμε πολύ τον Σεβασμιότατο.
We have to thank His Eminence. And my question is, who is the true Orthodox? Who represents Orthodoxy? One of the things that caused me grief as a physician from the inception of this debate a year ago was why don't we have a unanimous presence of the prelates, the hierarchs of the Church of Greece, and naturally of the Ecumenical Patriarch. It's not just isolated voices that we want to hear speak that might voice divergent views and approaches, but would it not be good if we were to present a unified, a unanimous view towards the government about how the church needs to exert a pastoral authority over the people who seek recourse in it, and again, how to contend with the crisis, the health crisis. Thank you very much. Let me add a comment. The Ecumenical Patriarchate has taken a position and maintains a view, standpoint. The problem is with rabid fanatics, where people who just don't want to see reason. I tell people who don't want to get vaccinated, well, then why don't you stop taking any painkillers or other medication? Anyway, there are those who want to play the role of the ultra-Orthodox who come without a mask. There were people, there were police who came to the liturgy because, you know, there's people exerting control. Things aren't free for all. Father Christos and then Father Spiridon should get ready. Your blessing, Your Eminence. Thank you very much. I am Father Christos from Grevena. At the initial session, Mr. Mavropoulos spoke of the transmission of the Holy Liturgy by the mass media, that he was downright opposed to that prospect, with the possible exception of the radio, whereas you said that it's possible to engage in a new kind of pastoral activity through the media. I understand what you're driving at, but with the transmission of the Holy Liturgy over the TV channels, would that find you an agreement, and under what circumstances? Yes, I accept it for those who cannot attend church. We've seen it in Greece for years and years and years, but it can turn into a sort of habitual way out. I don't need to go to church. I can just follow the liturgy on television. Now, of course, the wheelchair-bound granny or the bedridden patient in hospital cannot do otherwise, but for those who just content themselves with keeping away, that is not piety, that is not what one might expect. I am Spiridon Hionis from the Holy Diocese of Nea Smyrni. Are we ready, Your Eminence, to change qua church to deal with challenges? Do you find that we are in a state of preparedness? Please, would you specify what exactly you mean? Can we reform our pastoral care? Can we change things in liturgics to help people to allay their worries and to come closer to them? Well, I'd say not change pastoral care. Engage in proper pastoral care. I mean, hospitals, where did they come from? You know, we need to read about Saint Basil, his life, and Saint Nikiforos, the leper, and those prelates in Chios. Now, the second question on the Holy Communion. We need to have concord in the church, a single voice. It's not a free-for-all. A simple question to you. The holy oil of unction is something that you allow people to take home with them in Holy Week. I mean, you know, you are putting things on a different basis than the accepted one. As I was telling Father Ion, a father in America, we need to be always consistent. Regrettably, we are not. And people do what they want. You hear priests saying, leave the bishop alone. I mean, I know what I'm doing. I don't want to offend, but this is the way things are. Father Georgios. Your Eminence, with your blessing, I am Georgios Pampakidis from Zichni and Nevrokopi Diocese. You rightly take a position vis-a-vis fanaticism, but here's question in all humility. Apart from the fanaticism, there is this movement in the church occasioned by conservative fathers and Starsky, who call for ecclesial disobedience, and they're causing an uproar that they keep away from the church as a problematic, whereas they are pure. And that's the kind of purity condemned by the ecumenical councils. Now, should immediate measures be taken to condemn this, nip the movement in the bud? Well, yes, and it all boils down to what obedience means in the church. If there is obedience towards the hierarchs, everything is well and good. A gentleman came to me and said, do you want to know what I believe? I said, no, I don't. I know what my tenets ought to be. They come to me from Jesus Christ. So if the teaching of the church is this, you need to obey the church. If you are disobedient, you may be lost. It's just 10 things one reads. St. John of the Ladder. Now, I am from Kalymnos. You have heard what happened in Kalymnos. We need to be right and proper and obedient, not just in church. There are tenets, principles, government measures. We are subject to control. I don't know what happens there in Greece, but we need to be obedient. I don't know whether I've answered sufficiently.
Mr. Antonis Tsezanis.
Ναι, μίλα, Αντώνη.
Ναι. Ήθελα να ρωτήσω, ευλογή σεβασμιότητα. Υπάρχει ένα μεγάλο θέμα εδώ στην Ελλάδα για το πιστοποιητικό.
There is a huge issue about the vaccination certificate promoted by our Prime Minister for tourism reasons and others. And there are also many companies that, or like hotels, that will only accept vaccinated guests. The same could happen with the church. Since many people go to church, most probably they will ask for a vaccination certificate.
Πώς αντιμετωπιστεί?
How could we deal with this? It is not just Greece. How about flying and aviation companies? It's not just Greece. Let's be general, because it's Greece, Cyprus, and other Orthodox states. It's an ecumenical phenomenon. When I was vaccinated, I got a card because I have to have a second vaccine, so I will have an ID to show. I'm not that concerned about it, because we have to be very careful. When there was leprosis, there were separate hospitals for people suffering from this disease. We have to go back in history and see what happened and have everything in order. I don't know what is going to happen in Greece, and of course I don't know whether the church will express its views, but it's kind of difficult in Greece because of the system. Because, for example, who is going to express the specific line? Because in Greece we have the Greece of Church, the Dodecanese, the Church of Crete, we have Mount Athos. Things are complicated, and let God help us to achieve unity.
Would you like to comment on that? Mr. Zervos, would you like to comment on that, on the ID of the vaccinations?
Yeah, we are very strongly encouraging vaccination for all kinds of reasons to open up society for one's own personal protection. We're providing education to eliminate some of the myths around and misconceptions around vaccines. So we're very, very strongly encouraging vaccination, but the medical experts are not recommending that it is required or that you have to have a vaccination to work someplace or go visit someplace. So the mandatory vaccination is not being recommended. We're in a position now where we're just strongly encouraging it. The reason for the card is to provide documentation that vaccination was done, so that we know what vaccination a person received, so that we give them the same vaccination. So if they got one vaccine and need a second dose, then we make sure that we've given them the proper second dose. So it's more of a identification or documentation that they receive vaccine. It's not anything other than that.
Θα ήθελα να πω και ακόμη ένα πράγμα, μου επιτρέπετε.
Let me add something.
Δεν ξέρω ποιον να ρωτήσω εδώ.
Προχωρήστε.
Μόλις έρθουν να μου κάνουν παρατηρήσεις και τα λοιπά, θέλω να σας κάνω κι εγώ μία ερώτηση.
I would like to, when they say many things, I just ask, did you stay till the end of the service at Easter? And of course, 90% say, okay, you don't have the right to speak, you don't have the right to ask. I know I'm very strict, but I have to do so. Thank you very much. Now I will give the floor to Father Stavros.
Θεοφιλέστατη, Άγιοι Αρχιερείς, αδελφοί εν Χριστώ, Άγιοι Πατέρες, αγαπητοί εν Χριστώ.
Your Eminences and the graces, dear fathers, dear brothers and sisters in Christ, the consultation of the Ecumenical Patriarchate on the pastoring in times of the pandemic, which started on the 16th of December, is over now. For about 3 months, every 2 weeks, we were together. We created an internet company which acted as a think group and also a source of consolation in the chaotic climate prevailing in our days. What is impressive is that all through the consultation there has been a steady participation, 160 people in average on the Zoom platform and another 100 on the live stream of YouTube and Facebook for each session. The consultation has given the opportunity to us who are already connected with the network of the Ecumenical Patriarchate to get to know and connect with new persons in various sectors of society. This is a valuable add-on honoring the Patriarchate. I would like to thank you for your participation and contribution. We want you by us. We have had 20 speakers transferring their knowledge through their experiences in times of a pandemic. We would like to thank them, and we hope that God will give them strength to go on offering their service in love. We think that they are a valuable jewel of the network of the Ecumenical Patriarchate. They have given us a rich wealth of material which is going to be useful during the pandemic and afterwards. All speeches are available in the YouTube channel of the Facebook in our web page. It is impressive that until now there are about 5,500 visits to the YouTube. They wanted to listen to the speeches. With the blessings of the head of the network, His Eminence of Rhodes, we hope that all speeches will be written down and published in Greek and English. How could one sum up everything we have heard in this period? The speakers and the participants confirmed that the liturgical life and prayer define all pastoral activities. We have heard about the difficulties we are faced with in view of the threat of death and how these difficulties put our faith to the test. We had a witness that confirm that in the shadow of death, when our human strength leaves us, the love of God, praying, and the love of our siblings in Christ become an embrace accompanying us. We have heard how this love and this embrace are absolutely necessary elements for those that take care the sick and the grieved. What was confirmed was the dire need to have an open communication channel among all agencies taking care of fellow human beings in a climate of mutual respect and understanding. Also, what was pointed out was the risks created by closed ecclesiastical circuits based on fundamentalist views, and how necessary it is to find ways to create ecclesiastical communities seeking the isolated and many times forgotten and grieved fellow man, to help him be consoled among people that express the freedom and the love of the Holy Trinity. Allow me to repeat what I stressed in our session with the clergy. What remains pending are two basic issues. First, how can the joyous message of the gospel touch the heart of today's man? And secondly, what do we have to change in ourselves and the way we act as pastors to become accessible and receptive as vehicles of God's love of man? The consultation on pastoring church in a time of a pandemic has opened up new horizons. We are all waiting for our next meeting in Rhodes in 2022 for the 5th Congress for Health Pastoring. But until then, we will create other opportunities to meet on the internet. On behalf of the coordinating committee, I would like to express our thanks to everybody who has helped in this difficult organization, especially Father Emanuelis Klivakis, Father Nikolaos Doumas, Vasiliki Kofina, Andreas Moratos, Chrysanthi Virioti, Katarina Papavasiliou, and our dear translators and friends from Elite Language Services. I would like to thank you for your patience and apologies for my shortcomings. With respect and love, I would like to ask His Eminence of Rhodes, who is the head of our network and has embraced the whole effort with his continuous support since 2008 up to date, to declare the official closure of our consultation. Thank you again. Good evening. We have the pleasure of coming to the closure of this cycle of meetings. I'm not going to judge the result, but I will just mention the view of some people who either participated or listened to these talks and our dialogue. It was a successful effort. Nothing is perfect, but I think that through the network, witness was given thanks to the effort of Father Stavros, who held the burden, all this burden. I would like to thank him for what he has done so far for the network, and he's actually the soul of the network. I would also like to thank all participants mentioned by Father Stavros before, because without the cooperation of all these people, this enterprise would be very difficult or rather impossible. Let us thank the speakers and the participants, those that posed questions, expressed opinions. They have all contributed to expressing common concern, common concerns, to see things from another viewpoint. Personally, I think that there was a great benefit, and I think that it was very important that I had the opportunity to meet all of you in these sessions. The pandemic, as mentioned, hasn't finished. It's not going to finish soon. We are all experiencing a difficult situation, and we hope that God will help us to move on, each in his way. But I always stress that what we have to ask for is unity, concord, being able to follow the pace of the church. We are the people of God, and therefore we have to walk in today's desert with the vision of the promised land, because it is not just the pandemic. Unfortunately, we're faced with many other problems. We live in a constantly changing world. You see the geopolitical issues. We have this lack of clarity, creating this chaos, one might say it. However, God is present. We have to move on. In the network of the Ecumenical Patriarchate, we need the prayers of you all. We need your support to create something essential and important, to move on to something better, because this is always our aim. So I would like to thank you again. I would like to thank Father Stavros. I know his anxiety. I know his efforts. I just wish he is always healthy. And we want this effort to move on. I would like to thank our Patriarch and the Synod that has blessed this consultation. And let's hope that we will have more opportunities to be together, to talk, to exchange views, to learn and move on. In a while, we are going to have the 40th, the Lent, and we hope that God's grace will help us in a spirit of unity, brotherhood, concord, respect for the other, and optimism, which has been given sense by the light of resurrection we are going to experience after Lent. Let's meet again, and let's hope that we will be able to meet at Rhodes and have a similar experience, the experience we had in our previous congresses.
Ελέησον ημάς εις πολλά τη δέσποτα. Ευχαριστούμε.